assume we're on.
Let's give it a minute and then we can start. Oh, actually, you know what? Our time started. Let's go.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to our presentation. By way of introduction, I'm Jared Vandewey. I'm part of Deloitte's M&A offering portfolio. I advise clients on IT operating model design. I help them think through how they need to change to incorporate some of the new trends that are out there, like Agile, DevOps, and cloud.
I'm Naveen Advani, work for Cisco. I get asked this question, so I'm going to clear this up right up front. Not the Cisco with a C, not the computer networking company. We are Cisco with an S. We do different kinds of networks, supply chain networks for food distribution. I lead a component of our IT organization that's focused on supply chain merchandising. I also have responsibility for data and analytics platforms in the organization. And in the recent past, I've been leading a whole host of cloud initiatives along with Deloitte on the Agile transformation as well. So that's me.
Yeah, so for about the last 2 years, we've been working closely together doing a complete transformation of Cisco's IT function. And as part of that journey, what we've really come to see is how interdependent and mutually beneficial cloud and Agile are, right? Not only to each other, but also to Cisco's kind of broader vision of itself as, you know, a company that's really known for its technology solutions, and that's a destination for technology talent. So what we wanted to talk through today is really just what that kind of journey has looked like and how Agile transformation has been an accelerator of, you know, AWS migration. Oh, you still the clicker.
There you go.
So with that in mind, the way that we've structured the talk today, first I wanted to give you a bit more of an overview of the Cisco Corporation, since many of you might not be familiar with the business that it's in, you know, or the size of the organization or what its IT, you know, department looks like. So we wanted to give you some upfront context there. Then we'll share some of the upfront journey of Cisco to the cloud, you know, what some of those first steps were, what some of the benefits and challenges were as part of that. And that'll hopefully set the stage then for Agile and how that was really one of the solutions to address some of the challenges that Cisco was facing as it was moving towards the cloud. And then we'll end off the conversation with basically some next steps in terms of where Cisco is looking to go in terms of its cloud journey.
Do you want to build the whole slide out? All right, so let me give you a little bit of an overview about Cisco. We are a global food distribution organization. We market and distribute food products to various different industry segments, from restaurants, mom and pop shops, all the way up to healthcare institutions, education institutions, travel and leisure. So the planes that you came in on, or the restaurants that you're going to eat at this week, there's a very high likelihood that the food that you're eating there went through the Cisco supply chain. We are $59 billion in revenue last year and growing. We've grown over our history through a lot of M&A activity. We have about 67,000 employees globally. We operate in about 13 countries. Out of that, we've got about 500,000 unique customers. We've got SKUs of over 1 million actively sold. We've also got different lines of business. So our biggest business, which is a large component of our $59 billion revenue, is our broadline business, which essentially means we sell a whole wide assortment of products. We also have niche lines of business that cater to different segments within the restaurant industry. These are meat manufacturing, so special cut meats. We also have FreshPoint, which is a produce-based line of business, as well as a concept-based line of business called Sigma, which distributes to fast food chains like Wendy's and Subway. So these are a flavor of the different lines of business that we own. So that's us. If you go to the next slide, Jared. So how did we start our cloud journey? So as I mentioned, Cisco has grown over the years through a lot of M&A activities. We've acquired a lot of companies, and you know what comes with acquisitions. Those of you in the IT world that have lived through this know that there's a lot of different systems that you need to start integrating. So one of the first elements that we struggled through during our acquisition attempts in the past was the data set. How do we identify customers that are similar? How do you identify catalogs and items that are similar? Suppliers and synergies on the procurement side that you could gain from that M&A activity. So the very first foray into the cloud was looking at a cloud-based MDM solution so we could mash up these key elements of customer, item, and supplier and potentially get better insights into our M&A activities. So about 3 years ago, we were going through a larger M&A opportunity, and what we did then was look at this MDM solution, piloted a few things, and had great success on that during the M&A activity. So that was our first foray. It was a SaaS-based tool that we had looked at, and from there on in, the success that we had with that particular tool expanded our horizons on looking at PaaS and IaaS offerings as well. What we did in the first couple of years was, if I take a little bit of a step back, what we ran into at that point in time was the skill set of our resources. We needed a lot more knowledgeable resources on the ground that would be able to help us think through our journey. Our infrastructure was dated. We needed people to be able to translate, and that's where we leaned on folks like Deloitte and the AWS team to help us think through that, seed the knowledge, and helped us define what that next step looked like. Beyond the MDM play, we looked at modernizing our different applications that primarily ran on AS400. A lot of our applications, our core applications, still run on AS400s. We also have a rehosted mainframe environment that we've now transitioned to the cloud, but that was one of the key elements that we looked at as our first step into using a PaaS-based offering with AWS. We are at a point where we are now starting to scale all of our solutions, move a lot of our legacy applications into the cloud, and this is a combination of doing lift and shifts, refactoring applications, and also building net new capabilities. A lot of our data warehousing and analytics capabilities that we've transitioned to the cloud are net new capabilities that we hadn't explored in the past, and this has unlocked not just value from an IT perspective, but also opened up new avenues for business models. We have visibility into white space analysis, penetration opportunities. Some of the lines of business that I mentioned earlier, we actually had our field sales guys competing against each other for business out in the field. And we did not have visibility to that because they were all on different systems. We weren't able to see the conflict, if you will. Essentially what that meant for us was there was potential loss in margin and even product. So looking at the cloud, the journey for scale includes not just lift and shift from an IT perspective to re-platform, but also unlocking new business capabilities. So that's kind of been in a nutshell our journey so far. What we're going to do in the next few slides is talk about what our experiences were through the phases of this, and Agile's been a key part of that.
Awesome. And just to quickly cover some of the benefits, I think we all are aware of the benefits of cloud, and Naveen already covered a number of them. But just to knock off a few of the other ones that we were experiencing even early on as teams were moving in this direction. One, teams were getting more agile that had moved towards using the cloud in certain ways. Reduce time to deliver, be able to provision new capacity or servers faster than before, but then far more responsive to their customers. We also started to see some actual upskilling of employees as well, since this new way of working forced them to think about how to actually modernize their applications and think kind of outside of their traditional domains and a little more broadly about the problems that they were trying to solve. I think there were some cost efficiencies as well around reducing the physical data centers. So I think now they're at a point where about 40% of their on-prem servers have been decommissioned or transitioned over, and about 70% of their main Houston data centers now retired as well, based on moving those workloads over and the cost efficiencies that come with that. So a lot of benefits coming from this, and other ones too around system reliability and things like that. But there was also, I think, a lot of challenges, and the challenge is where it gets, I think, a little more interesting. I was going to give a little disclaimer up front, and I'll do it now since I forgot. But we really wanted to focus this talk on was less around the challenges that had to do with technical implementation of AWS services, and more about kind of the organizational and operating model challenges that Cisco faced as it was moving in this direction. Those actually started to present, I think, a real barrier to moving into the cloud more and more of their workloads.
And just to add to what Jared said, right, though the session's not necessarily taking a double click into the technology issues, there are a bunch of sessions that we have at reInvent that the guys in the front row are leading that are Cisco focused and take a little bit of a deeper dive on some of the challenges that we've had. So the folks in the front row here can give you some additional insights. If you have specific questions or the sessions that they're going to be leading, we'll also provide you a context of where we kind of came from.
So, with those benefits that we talked about, the demand was high, but some of those organizational challenges that were preventing, scaling cloud more broadly or faster, were things like, having at that point in time real experienced, strong leadership around this that could really define the strategy for cloud, think through what the right model was with service providers, what the right migration path was, and which areas should be targeted first, and things like that. So I think that was one challenge. And it was expanded on by the fact that the workforce itself was not used to working in this way. So the more general workforce didn't know necessarily how to design, develop, or run cloud-based solutions, which prevented another real obstacle to accelerating this journey. An added issue then, if you tried to fix that from coming outside, was the structural fact that, the hiring manager in the organization didn't necessarily know what types of talent profiles to target either in order to bring in kind of that next generation talent that could work in this way. So they ended up essentially hiring people according to the mold that they had in the past, and which led then basically to the old way of working and kind of preserving that way of working versus pushing forward. And that then also then turned into more reliance on the vendors that were in place at that time. So in a lot of cases, if you're moving to the cloud, that's going to ultimately eliminate a lot of the work that vendors are doing. And so they're not necessarily incentivized to do that work and to help push the organization forward. So that became another issue. And then there's just the organizational challenge, the fact that the organization was structured more in silos, right, as most IT organizations or traditional IT organizations are. So even in the infrastructure space, you had separate network and security and server and other teams. And if a team wanted to move, to the cloud, they had to then interact with all of those teams and stitch together a solution, and all the handoffs that involved, which made it basically a very inefficient and manual process and not necessarily, pushing people to actually move in that direction. So those are some of the more operating model challenges that existed and that were really causing, a barrier in terms of moving Cisco forward in terms of its cloud ambitions.
Yeah, just to add a little bit of color to what Jared said there and give you guys some specific examples. I had a couple of teams. I'll take one example of our rehosted mainframe environment where we were trying to move our mainframe up into the cloud, our rehosted mainframe up into the cloud. And the team essentially comprised of, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit, was we had a managed services vendor that we used for managing that application. So the skill set in-house was fairly limited. One of the folks in the front row here kind of managed that capability or that technology and the platform. Being able to get the right skill set in to identify how we would go about the migration was extremely important. AWS brought in their consulting services to kind of help us think through the architecture. One of the key learnings that we've had over the years while we've worked with them across multiple projects is that if you don't start this off the right footing, you can't always adjust. That's the beauty of the cloud. You can always adjust, and you typically have to adjust over time. But if you kind of start off on the right foot, it helps the project a whole lot. We learned that the hard way with a couple of projects, but this one, we brought in the right AWS help. Our actual first attempt at moving our mainframe, the rehosted mainframe, into the cloud, it's RME, and it hosts all of our corporate functions. It's got our corporate finance, our corporate procurement, as well as national sales. So it's a really mission-critical system. And the first attempt we made at moving it to the cloud essentially tanked. It was over a weekend. We had some challenges around moving the size of data from the mainframe up into the cloud. The pipes weren't big enough. The tools that we were using weren't necessarily the right tools, as well as the size of the environment in the cloud. We had some challenges with that. The good news in all of this was that there was no business disruption. So if you go to the business and ask them if this RME thing moving to the cloud, did it work? They were none the wiser, right? So it was still working because the environment that we had in our data center was still up and running. We failed over seamlessly. There was no business disruption. That's the beauty of the cloud. What we then did, though, there were two key things that came out of this, right? Fail fast, fail cheap, and fail without business disruption. That's kind of key to our overall mantra to go to the cloud. If I look at the two key lessons that the team kind of went through was, first up, look at those three things. The main other thing is that looking at the size of the environment is a little different than on-prem servers. What I mean by that is you can always size up a cloud environment and size it down. So when you're thinking about migrating to the cloud, go as big as you think that you need to go, and then you can fine-tune over time. You don't really have that luxury with on-prem servers. It's all in, or you've got to figure out that's the size that I need, and you're essentially locked into that CapEx investment for time. With this, we've been able to, over a 2-year period, we've been able to resize that environment and reduce our cost footprint down by 50%. So we sized it up. The second attempt we made, we were successful. We sized it up, moved all of the data, And over time, we've got our cost reduction down to a 50% of what our original run costs were on the on-prem data center. So that's another key learning that came out of this. The other one quick thing that I'll make note of is that, and Jared alluded to it in his talk about the resources and on-site talent, we were a heavily outsourced organization 3-4 years ago. Over the last 3 years, we've been able to insource the right kind of talent for the right strategic areas. So we've chosen our areas that we want to go deep in on. Those are the secret sauce elements, if you will, for our landscape. And we've insourced those, and not just insourced those with the same technologies, but also brought in resources that understand the domain and the cloud technology world. So it's a good hybrid mix of the talent that we've got in-house for those critical systems. And that's also helped grease the skids on our cloud journey.
So the short of it really was, there were a lot of kind of operating model and organizational challenges that they were facing. And as Cisco started to look at this, and based on some of the experiences that they had as well moving towards Agile, they started to see Agile as a potential answer to some of those challenges. Basically, to give a bit of a background on that as well, in parallel to moving and exploring the cloud, Cisco was also exploring Agile. So they had set up a number of Pathfinder teams to start testing out these new frameworks, see how they worked for Cisco and where they might want to apply them. And just as they kind of learned what the benefits were early on with cloud, the same held true for Agile. And like cloud, it became kind of an important part of Cisco's future IT strategy. And they could start to see even early on how even some basic Agile practices, things like product owners are setting up more cross-functional teams, or even just a more incremental iterative mindset to focus teams on value, could really help address some of the challenges that they were facing in terms of scarce resources and things like that, and making sure that they were best utilized. So Agile became really a solution to some of those operating model challenges that Cisco was facing in moving towards the cloud. And looking at how other companies were doing this and even their own experiences with those Pathfinder teams, they knew that scale was a challenge with Agile as well, and they wanted to think through, how do we actually scale this and do it in a more holistic way. So, the way that they started to think about the problem was, instead of just focusing more, on what they call delivery agility and trying to inject more Agile frameworks and practices on teams or for certain initiatives to speed those up and try to get value faster, they wanted to look at the whole problem and rethink everything, every aspect of IT, and how it needed to change to really support those teams. So not just doing Scrum and having product owners and things like that, but how do governance processes need to change? How do talent processes and hiring need to change so we can become more agile? How does our workspace need to look, right, so the teams can collaborate more effectively? They wanted to look at every aspect of their IT organization and how it needed to change to move them more, beyond delivery agility, which they knew would be, hit an upper bound at some point in time if they didn't change those things, but move more towards what's called enterprise agility, right, and make some of those more bigger structural changes that were really needed to make the whole system work and be agile. So, with that kind of approach in mind, cloud almost became a critical enabler. It did become a critical enabler of Agile. We already saw and had experience of how it could speed up the delivery of teams and support them in that process. But also in turn then, moving towards enterprise agility really helped push then the cloud migration, right? By making the whole organization, the IT organization, more nimble and faster and helping to accelerate some of these migrations and transformations. So, the short of this slide is really that the goals of the Agile transformation at Cisco were, strongly aligned with those of cloud, but they were also broader, right? Cisco was trying to get more out of essentially the Agile transformation and reshaping out of everything that it did from an IT perspective. Some of those goals, just to go over a few of them, one which I already called out was how do we focus our teams really on the highest value? Looking back at the cloud problem, we have scarce resources. Let's make sure they're focused where that value is. They wanted to increase the speed as well, which is a common goal that people have with going Agile. Deliver stuff faster and cheaper. But as part of that, they wanted to make sure that they maintained the quality. They didn't want to throw out the quality or trade that off for speed. So that became a key goal of the Agile transformation as well, which tied in nicely with cloud, like we already mentioned. And they also had the talent aspect to this, which I think is really the key one. And this is where I think Agile really helps stress, this more cross-functional team concept, or even cross-functional team members, right? That could work across the technology landscape and be more, fungible or deployable depending on where the work is. So part of the Agile transformation goal was actually building up that workforce of the future that could be, help them become more agile and actually drive these migrations faster.
So if I could, a couple of things that Jared kind of talked about that are really key and hit home for us. One of them was around the mindset, and that's extremely important. A mindset of incremental change, making sure you define what value is in terms of a minimum viable product. Getting the organization to think through that, internalize that, that's extremely important. All of the technology pieces could function as smooth as ever, but if you don't change your mindset of how you adopt that change and how you evangelize that change through the organization, it will fall flat. We've had issues with that where technology worked, but the business wasn't really ready or at the table making those decisions for us. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to look at some of the presentations that we did last year at re:Invent, but one of our key successes within AWS was our data lake that we built in AWS. It's called Seed, Cisco's ecosystem for Cisco's enterprise data lake. It's our data lake. Thank you. I promise there is a full form for the acronym as well. You can look it up on YouTube. That actually was initially started off as a replatforming technology project, right? We had an aging appliance and we had to get off of it. The challenge with that was we were spending dollars in the IT budget to get a technology project done. What we had to then do was figure out a way to identify business value and iteratively get off of the boxes that we had on-prem into the cloud. So we partnered with the business, figured out there were opportunities in the category management and merchandising space, took those business opportunities from a data and analytics perspective, moved those functional areas into the cloud, into our first data lake install, got business value out of it, and had the business really onboarded on the journey, right? So from a technology replatform project, it became more of a business value unlock. So wherever you guys can find that good balance between business value and technology replatforming, absolutely go for it and do that, because that then builds the momentum and the right lens on migrating to the cloud. So that's really, really important. That's one. From a seed migration perspective, we also ran into challenges, and this was more so because it was a net new capability, not a lot of our engineers on the ground, and we had a few of those only, a handful, probably two, initially to start with, and we had to then go outside and recruit a lot of this engineering talent. And we looked at colleges, we had interns coming in, AWS helped us with a lot of these trainings that we conducted on site, as well as sent people off site for these trainings to build up that internal resource pool of skill that we needed to be able to move the rest of the infrastructure and data into the cloud. Having done that, one of the key successes that we've had is that a lot of our resources that were knowledgeable about our legacy platforms and our data and Cisco processes also came along for the journey. So that the interns and the new engineers that we brought on that had cloud engineering backgrounds were able to get the other resources on the team along for the journey. So it was a symbiotic relationship where these guys kind of talked about the data that we had in Cisco and how it was supposed to be consumed. And these guys had the engineering concept, and the team kind of meshed together really well. So that was one of the key success stories, an element of talent that really worked for us well. So wherever you guys get an opportunity to do that, that's also another tenet of our migration that I think we're going to carry forward.
So how did Cisco approach the Agile transformation? Essentially, I already talked about trying to approach it more holistically. The way that they did that was they looked at everything that they did from an IT perspective, and they mapped it to one of these three Agile team constructs. So they rethought everything that they did essentially in terms of products, platforms, or services, right? These different types of Agile teams. And what this resulted in then was essentially kind of that core operating model, organizational structure, that they could then start to layer on and figure out how the other pieces needed to work. Things like governance or funding processes, or talent processes and things like that, or how reporting lines need to look in this new way of working. But this was really the core of it. And to go into each of these three constructs a little bit more detailed, the way that they thought of product teams was essentially as more business-focused teams. So these teams were organized around and accountable for parts of the Cisco value chain. So one example might be something like the warehouse management team. They would own, all of the technology that enabled that part of the value chain, right? Kind of full stack, end to end, everything from, managing the business relationships, for that part, all the way through to, developing, releasing and supporting the product, whether it's front-end components or back-end infrastructure. This also meant that for product teams then, any kind of migration to the cloud was part of their remit. In terms of how these teams were composed, essentially they were composed of a product owner who was really focused on setting the direction for that product, making sure that the team was focused on the highest value and making sure that those were meeting the needs of the business. And then there'd be 1 to 3 agile teams or pods that were aligned to it as well, right, to keep it manageable. And those teams would be heavily focused more on the software engineering talent and hopefully add skill sets that could work across that technology stack. Typically, they worked in a Scrum framework, and they're now delivering new software for their product every 2 weeks. To distinguish that from the platform teams on the next one, in terms of size and composition, very similar, same types of resourcing, also having a platform owner that's really focused on the customer and making sure that that platform is meeting those needs. But where they differ from a product team is a platform team is more focused on self-service enablement. That's their mission and why they exist. The whole point of a platform team is to enable product teams to work independently, without handoffs, without that service relationship, which we'll talk about in a second, that they can move quickly and be agile and be responsive to their customers. So that's a platform team, right? And the third one then is really a service team, which is where there's still automation or self-service is just not feasible or doesn't necessarily make sense. So an example of that might be something like vendor management or help desk, right? You still need to have some kind of handoff or manual intervention to support product teams. If we look at the cloud team that was formed at Cisco, it's a prime example of a platform team, right? So it's essentially been set up to automate and drive self-service capabilities so that product teams can run on their own, right? And run without essentially handoffs whenever they need to do something new from a hosting perspective, but they can run that on their own. And the key then to these 3 constructs is really their interaction between them, right? So the whole key to making this work is setting up these full stack product teams that have the skills that they need so that they can actually develop that full stack of technology associated with their part of the value chain, but also then driving the automation by these platform teams. It's really about pushing them from the service model to a self-service model, right? From service team more to a platform team so that the product teams can then run. And that's a tough thing to happen, especially when they're constantly being hit with service requests and things like that try to distract them from some of their goals around automation. Once you can do that, though, that's when you start to get kind of real agility on the business side and the responsiveness there, and also start to enable the product teams to really drive their own cloud migration as well, as they have now a consumable platform that they can use to do that. So once we essentially had kind of this core structure in place, the next step then was really, like I said, rethinking all those other enterprise components to really make this work. So things like I said, funding processes, moving that away from an annual process of funding projects to a more frequent funding of the actual teams, to give them the actual freedom to move around and shift to wherever the priorities are. Around talent process, I think we talked about a number of things there, especially around hiring. Something else that Cisco's been looking at doing is setting up a more central talent pipeline with the hiring managers that know how to identify and bring in that type of talent that they really want to start seeding the organization with, that they can start to then set up these product teams in ways that can be more effective. So that's really the next step then, is layering on all those other pieces to get towards kind of their vision of enterprise agility.
A couple of quick adds to what Jared kind of talked through there. That organizational model, or the structure of the organizational model that you saw there, it took us a few iterations to get to it. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. We talked to a multitude of different companies that were ahead of us in this transformation journey, and each one of them had actually started somewhere and ended up, directionally in the same place, but in a very different structure the way they started. One of the things that I would advise you guys to do if you're starting the journey is don't wait to spit polish and get something ready for prime time. Just as you're looking at agility in product delivery and your software engineering, look at some level of agility and change even within the org structure and the construct of the org structure. Start somewhere where you think it's right, and then be open to the fact that this will morph and change based on learnings that you have through that journey. We've learned that over ours. We've been at this for a couple of years. It's what you see on the slide there is substantially different than where we started. And I'm sure it will continue to evolve over the next few years as we learn more. One of the other things that's critical to us is getting the business on board with us on the Agile journey. Agile is not something that IT organizations do in a silo, right? Some of the interpretations that we had of Agile when we started this off was, Agile is something that you guys do in 2 weeks and give me things faster, right? That was the interpretation the business had. And all of us, hopefully in the room, know that that's not really the case. We need the business to be at the table, to take ownership of what they want built, help us prioritize backlogs, and work with us on a regular cadence so that the product that we're delivering to them excuse me, is actually what they need, right? So it's not something that's thrown over the fence and 4 months later, some vendor somewhere has developed something and the IT organization goes back to the business and says, this is what it is. So this is not just a mindset change for IT, but it is also something that's really, really critical for the business to be at the table for. And I wouldn't say that we have that solved yet, but we are getting to a point where we've got a lot of our business leadership at the same point in thinking. We've got to evangelize that through the organization, but we are at a good point where a lot of our executive leadership is lined up to the way of thinking. So that's really, really important and something that you guys should keep on the radar as you go on your journeys yourselves.
So just to quickly cover some of the improvements that were realized with these changes. On the first couple to me are kind of the same, right? Where we're at now, there's essentially 40 teams that are using cloud services as part of their products, which to me makes it a strong case that those consumable self-service capabilities are now starting to get in place. The product teams are starting to get upskilled to use them, right? And we're starting to accelerate that migration all the faster with this model. We're getting things out faster. Over the course of this transformation, the average time that it takes to develop a feature has gone from around 50 days down to about 19 days, including the development of new self-service capabilities by the cloud team or new business capabilities by product teams. So that's another huge, I think, improvement that we've been able to achieve. That and the actual throughput as well has more than doubled over that course. So before, where around just over 300 features were being developed every 2 weeks in every sprint across the teams, now we're hitting over 700, right? So we're getting a significant productivity gains as well through this model, right? Which is all kind of, I think, a really great news story. And the last one is really the shift then in kind of the position of IT and becoming more of a, trusted partner with the business, right? Now that they've started to work more closely in this new way of working and seeing some of the benefits of it, it's starting to change the way that IT and the business are working together. We're in a partnership type of model.
One quick add on that, right? If I kind of think through some of the improvements that we've realized, and if I look at the IT culture change, one of the things that we've done successfully, a lot of the people in the front row have actually helped do this with our organization, is we've incorporated at least a quarterly hackathon with the business, right? And get the business at the table to see the value that IT can deliver, and it's not, you give something to IT and it's going to take you a number of months or years to get something back. Hackathons have actually started changing the mindset of think small, right, and get some value immediately out of it, and the team, in terms of that agile thinking, hackathons have been a really, really good measure of starting to change that culture within IT. One of the examples that I can quickly think of that's derived a whole lot of value for us in the last, I want to say in the last quarter, we've had some pressures from a delivery cost perspective. So when we deliver product to our customers, seeing real-time data on our drivers and our vehicles on how much time they're taking at each stop is really critical. And then giving them the coaching on, hey, this is what you should be doing at a particular stop. This is how you could reduce stop time is really important. At one of the hackathons, we were able to get a lot of our data kind of pulled in real time into our data lake, Cisco's ecosystem for enterprise data. That's seed. Thanks, Habib. So we were actually able to deliver value really, really quickly to the business through that. And some of this stuff came through a hackathon. And we've actually helped reduce and shine a spotlight on where the opportunities were from a delivery cost efficiency perspective. So things like that, the IT folks love to experiment with new technologies. The business loves it even more if it actually gives you value out of it. So keep that dimension on as you kind of think of opportunities for you guys to look at cloud migrations as well.
So this is just one other example of some of the benefits that were realized over the course of this journey. So this is a specific use case, around deploying a web server in a DMZ. But really from before even exploring cloud, we were talking on the order of months to implement something like that. With all these handoffs between teams, whether it was vendor teams, the different infrastructure teams, right? A lot of handoffs that are slowing down, and obviously people not necessarily satisfied with that reality. In the early days of exploring cloud, they were able to drive this down significantly, right? So the time to implement went basically from months to days, and we also massively reduced the handoffs that were involved in this. But now, over the course of the last year or two, essentially we've got this now down to minutes, as we now really focus this platform team on improving those capabilities. And the handoffs are essentially non-existent if they're needed at all. And the teams obviously are liking this approach far better.
To color that out, it really looks good on the slide, right? So we definitely have had an evolution and journey through getting from the left to the right. Not all of our infrastructure is in that place yet. So we've got opportunities that we're looking at to move a lot of our teams to that model. We've had successes in silos, and we've got to start scaling that. That's our next big mountain to conquer, is how do we get this evangelized across the enterprise. One other thing that I'll call out is as we look at Agile and look at cloud, the biggest thing, there's change across the IT organization. The mindset needs to change across all application development teams and infrastructure teams. The biggest change is for the infrastructure teams, because they move from the doers, building servers, making sure servers are up and running, monitoring servers, to then becoming teams that enable product teams to have their own infrastructure and manage their own infrastructure. So going from that mindset to being able to support product teams to do their self-service is a really critical shift and important element of this. And as we looked at that slide there, the left was infrastructure doing everything to now becoming more of a self-service enabler, if you will, for the product teams. And that's, in my mind, been the biggest speed bump that we've run into. We've gotten over it. We've got to figure out our way to kind of scale this out to the enterprise now. So this is me. All right, so I'll close this out, and then we can kind of go to questions in a second here. So as we look at the next steps in our journey, right, if I look at where we were and what were the three important pillars, and I'll come to the slide in a second, you've got to look at cloud migration from a people, process, and a technology lens. It's not just about looking at new cloud technologies and saying, hey, I'm going to take this to the cloud and it's going to be all better. How do you look at changing the skill set, the mix, the mindset of the people? Really, really important. And the last piece is the people piece of it, right? Is how do I the people piece of it is the talent, and the actual the change in Agile is the other key component of this. Is how do I actually start changing the mindset of the organization to think in iterative increments and value increments as well. So these three elements, if you kind of think of holistically, that'll help you on your Agile journey. From our perspective, the three things that you see up there, we are now focused on adding new capabilities through the cloud. One of the big things that we're looking at doing is things around data science. There are a couple of guys here that are driving that capability within the organization. So starting looking at technologies like SageMaker and our data lake in combination. So we've got the foundation with our data lake. How do you leverage SageMaker now to start exploiting that from a business perspective is one of the key elements that we are starting to drive. And the last piece is automation. One of the big things that you will see is instead of having an army of folks offshore to be able to do some of the capabilities or perform some of the tasks that you have, start looking at cloud automation for a lot of these works. Be looking at investing in RPA, as well as the overall DevOps mentality to be able to automate things from a CI/CD deployment perspective to doing things that are repetitive using RPA. So that's kind of our next steps in our evolution, if you will. And we will continue to evolve, and hopefully you guys have got a little bit of insight on how we've evolved over the last 2 to 3 years. I think with that, we can open up for questions. Yes. Thanks, Habib.
What was the resistance from infrastructure team that you
I wouldn't use the word resistance, but there was definitely a mindset shift that needed to happen, and it happened over time. So to your question, right? So the challenge is always, instead of me controlling what I do with my servers, now I'm going to give it to somebody else to look and manage at, right? So it's my purview, my control, which it's almost a mindset shift of, hey, I'm going to enable you to do the right things. If you go, and I'm going to give you the guardrails, right? The infrastructure team, or the cloud enablement team, if you will, provides you the guardrails and the tools to see, hey, this is how you use it. If you stay within those guardrails, well and good. The product teams are supposed to do that. But if you don't, then the infrastructure team has kind of the reins on that. The challenge that we ran into was letting go, right? Making sure that there are the guardrails built, but also letting go and letting the product teams do their thing, providing them the tools. That was essentially the challenge and the mindset shift that was a little bit of a speed bump in our journey.
And they have to work in two modes, right? So you're asking them essentially at the beginning to be a platform team and a service team. And they have to manage both of those types of work. So I think that's then the real challenge. And how is it that over time they can at least dedicate some capacity every sprint, at least to the automation and platform building, so that they can start to then reduce the service side of the equation. So it might be less resistance, but more just, hey, we can't do this yet, right? Because we have to support all these service requests.
So was it like knowledge transfer, roundup sessions, training?
All of the above. All of the above. And actually, one of the other key elements is making them feel comfortable in the role that they're playing, right? It's not that the jobs or there is an element of, hey, am I going to be needed in the future because all of this is going to go away? The job just changes, and it changes dramatically for the infrastructure team. And that mindset, if you don't adopt, it becomes a little bit of an impediment. And that's where I think the change needs to happen a lot quicker, and that'll help grease the skids, in my mind, for a lot of the cloud transition.
Is there questions at the...
There's a lot of hands. I'm going to let him pick.
I think I saw you first. Yes, yeah.
How did you manage to budget through this process? Like how well did you, and in terms of how your biggest
Jared, do you want to take that?
How do we manage the budget through this process?
when you came up with your business case and why you're doing this, step back, how close were you on target?
Yeah, so the last time that we checked on this, I'm not sure if I can actually cite numbers from the business.
Let's not do that. Let's please not do that.
But essentially, the last time we checked against this, we were, trying to think of the percentage off. We were about, within 10% of where we wanted to hit. 7% off. 7% off, there you go. Right? In terms of right now, at this point in time, we're pretty close, right? It was more, the business case was around a 2-year timeline. So that's where we were still about 10% off. But in terms of where we hope to be at this point in the trajectory, we're actually pretty close.
So was your question around budget planning and how we plan for this, or?
So we just did our migration and, we came up with a surprise in our budget process. I was wondering if anybody else
I do want to qualify what he's saying, though, right? So one of the key elements that we kind of learned over the journey is it's not just about the numbers, and it's not a like-for-like in most situations. There's a lot of unlock on the capability side. That's the top side of it. It's not the bottom line in terms of cost, but it unlocks more capability and potentially top-line revenue for you. Typically, IT organizations aren't good at measuring that, and that's the element that actually adds on the additional piece of color to this, right? So even though we came in off by 7%, there was a lot of value unlock on the business capability side that's part of the equation as well. I'm sorry? Great question. Still trying to figure that out. No, so one of the things... No. So there are a couple of areas that we've actually been able to quantify this. So our category management efforts actually released a year-on-year benefit of about $50 million from the work that we've done. Now the business obviously is questioning the number, let me say it that way, but we've been able to go back to them and showcase the value before and after. And I don't think the numbers lie when you look at what we've been able to prove out with what we've done with category management in particular.
Oh, yeah, I think you were first. Both.
I think it varies by team. In the most aggressive, the example that I kind of took about on the seed team, I would say it was probably like a 70-30, with 70% being net new. The team's essentially net new. We've got probably 1 or 2 resources that were the original resources that we had to upskill, but those core resources have been key in my mind to get the new resources onboarded with what we wanted to do and understand what we had in our landscape. So the 70% in my mind wouldn't have been successful without the 30% of the resources that we had already on the ground. Yes?
When you started building your guys' DevOps teams, the actual full teams, how did you decide what resources would fall in and how the business unit would be migrated in as well? Because the big thing I've seen contention with is the business unit's ability to not think that they're not part of IT. Because they always say, I'm not IT, but they are. They have to be to do this migration.
So we haven't really got our business as part of our agile transformation, and that's what I was alluding to. We've got our leaders on the business now thinking through this with us. We've had success in pockets with some business functions, not business units necessarily. We've got our warehousing function that Jared kind of mentioned. We have actually a product owner in the business that owns that. And that's where you see real traction, real value, and real progress being made. Where we've actually got proxy product owners, it takes a little time for us to be able to deliver that value and for the business to recognize that the value is really being delivered. So we're still trying to figure out the answer to that, and I think we've got an evolution to go through on our business side to be able to get on board enterprise-wide with Agile. We've had success in pockets and in silos so far. But you're right, it absolutely requires the business to be at the table. Yes?
Yeah. How do you measure the performance of your teams? What metrics do you look at?
Oh, yeah, lots of metrics, right? Like some of the key ones that we've been using, at least early on, I think it goes through phases with teams. I'll look at least from an agile perspective. But initially, we're looking at their velocity. You know, how stable is their velocity? Is it increasing, at least early on? Is it now getting more stable? Looking at, their sprints. Are they conforming to what their sprint goals were? Are they actually hitting their plans? Sprint over sprint was a key one early on. Other ones that we've wanted to start looking at as well now that teams are starting to get more mature is, are they actually managing their technical debts and driving down defects? So something like failure demand, and how much are they committing to each sprint in terms of technical debt and other things like that to make sure they're maintaining the quality of their products and platforms. We're also looking at customer satisfaction. That's one of the key ones that we wanted. Who cares if we're fast and building a lot of stuff if our customers aren't happy? So that was one of the key metrics that leadership really wanted to focus on as well and make sure was in place.
So as you move from low to high, that's like your team size reduced. So what did you do with that?
Say that again, I couldn't follow the question.
Team size reduced from 7 to 8 to 1 to 2 as you move from low to high in terms of the practices.
It's more about refocusing, I think, those resources on more value-add activities. So instead of being a service, they're actually now focused more on automation and things like that.
And those numbers were handoffs. They weren't team
it was
sizes.
handoffs. It wasn't reduction in
But
teams.
so to qualify all of that, right? So we've been looking at, obviously Agile, the whole goal is to help be a lot more efficient because you prioritize the work. We've been able to reduce our spend on vendors, for example, that have been offset with in-source candidates that we brought on to the Cisco payroll, if you will.
Yeah.
So there's been an opportunity to do that across different areas and different product teams.
Yep.
Yes?
Could you just frame what portion of your workloads have migrated to cloud so far, and now with the new best practices in the next 2 years, where are you planning to be 2 years from now?
I think the big nut that we've got still to crack is our AS400s that kind of run our overall ERP, quote-unquote, custom ERP solutions, if you will. We've got about 70% of our personal data center that we had in Houston that's migrated to the cloud. About 40% of the rest of the on-prem has been migrated. And we are looking to migrate the rest over the next couple of years, like you alluded to. I think, like I said, the AS400s are going to be the one big one that it's not just a lift and shift. It's looking at refactoring those applications, and that's what takes a little bit of time and investment. Yes?
How different do you think it would have been if you had done Agile before cloud?
Hindsight's always 20/20. I don't think I would have done this any differently than where we've ended up. If we were able to do that, the change that I would have made was get the business on board to Agile a lot earlier, and I would still push for that because that would then help us prioritize our work and then focus on the right things. We've kind of looked at partnerships in where IT's got challenges, right? Even the seed showcase that we kind of talked about where we had a data warehouse migrated to the cloud, it was us kind of looking for opportunities to partner with the business. I would kind of flip it around and think about business getting more agile mindsets so that they look at, hey, that's where the value is, and I want to go focus on that, rather than a whole slew of different things that we typically end up doing. So that's the change that I would potentially make.
And when I started doing agile transformation work, cloud wasn't as what it is now. And basically there, it was a matter of engaging with infrastructure teams a lot earlier and making sure that agile teams were having that planning horizon so they could plug them in and make sure that those requirements were known and fitting into their more timely or time-consuming processes, if that makes sense.
There's a couple of questions over there.
Maybe a good question on the mainframe re-platforming.
Yes.
The application that you moved to the re-platforming solution, very legacy or relatively current?
It's completely legacy, so it's a mainframe COBOL application
COBOL,
that was re-platformed from mainframe to a microfocus-based platform. But it's all COBOL code that we've moved up in the cloud. Yes?
How do you prioritize new features? Is it being done by the business or by you as a department?
Great question. So going back to what I was just alluding to in my conversation with the gentleman here, depending on the business involvement with those product teams and ownership that they have in those teams, the business for the warehouse team, for example, that I alluded to earlier, they prioritize the backlog. They actually help work with our Scrum Masters and our proxy product owners on the IT side to prioritize all the feature releases. There's another flavor, which on the other extreme is we kind of go back to say, hey, this is all the stuff that is in our queues, and we proactively work with different stakeholders across the business to be able to prioritize that, where we don't have clear line of sight on product ownership yet. So like I said, the ideal place for us to end up would be product owners reside in the business, and they actually help drive prioritization. But that's an evolution that we're kind of getting to. Yes, one of you guys.
Your end of life.
You had one already, the guy behind you. No, go ahead.
How are you guys treating your end of life then with that logic? Because are you guys treating all end of life products where they have to go cloud, or are you guys giving them the option where they can go wherever they want?
So that's an interesting question. So I'll take it the flip way, right? Any net new capabilities, we are pushing for cloud first, right? So that's kind of the path that we want to go for. For legacy applications, it's, I think, a two-pronged lens of why would you move to cloud. If there's a clear path to move to cloud and there's a financial benefit or a capability unlock, absolutely, check the box. If there isn't a clear line of sight, right, and it's more complex and it's a longer time duration, which IT needs to invest in and there's no clear business alignment on it, we typically keep it on the back burner. There was a question right behind you.
Yeah, remind me, how many employees do you have?
How many what?
How many employees? People working
Employees, I'm sorry. 67,000 overall in Cisco. From an IT perspective, we've got about 1,000.
Yeah.
How long
Oh,
did it take to
He's policing the questions in the back there.
to break up those silos? Are you done with breaking up all of the IT silos that you have? Because I can imagine that takes years.
yeah.
We're working on it. I think we're in a good place, but like I said in my earlier comments, I don't think you stop. I think it's an evolution that you're on a journey continually. We are at a point where I think we've made substantial progress in breaking down those silos within the IT organization. The next opportunity or the next battlefield is going to be making those changes on the business side cross-functionally as well, because it's not just merchandising or sales or procurement that kind of works. It's cross-functional alignment across the business as well. So that's another key element. That's probably the next big hill that we need to conquer. Yes?
How is the knowledge transfer managed from Deloitte to Cisco to be more self-sufficient and managing involvement moving forward?
Do you want to take that, Jared?
Yeah, like speaking from a transformation perspective, because that's at least the role that I can speak to. We've actually done this in lockstep with Cisco from the very beginning, so about 2 years ago when we started. And, whether it was, leading this with Cisco people, right, that were actually owning this transformation and working with them day to day. Even the whole coaching program that we stood up, we didn't bring in Deloitte coaches, we launched Cisco coaches and supported them so that they were actually driving and sustaining this change on their own from the very beginning. That's the model that we wanted to apply here so that, they had that internal then network and capability to continue to drive this throughout the organization and continue to mature. So it was really like a partnership all along, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Yep, I think you were, yeah.
Yeah, so at dev teams, using Agile and existing patterns, they can deliver value really quickly. What kind of processes do you use for when those teams want to bring in new cloud services? Like how do you get all the other stakeholders to move just as fast as the app dev team? Because
Well, that's where we're trying to, I think, bring in more of the platform concept, right? And have them actually work in just as agile a way as the product teams. So the cloud team itself is continuously working at bringing in making available new cloud capabilities, right? At least trying to meet wherever the customer needs are and trying to align their backlog accordingly. I don't know if I'm missing an.
Is your question more centered around innovation and net new capabilities?
How do you keep pace if you have 40 app dev teams and they're all running 100 miles an hour? How big is your cloud platform team that they can evaluate all these services?
Hey, so great question. I don't think we've solved for that. We are looking to solve for it, and there's a couple of gentlemen in the front row here you might want to talk to after. One of them leads our enterprise architecture and engineering capabilities. And one of the things that we're trying to get to is figure out how do we have a regular cadence of looking at stuff that's happening in the marketplace, not just AWS, but holistically, right? A lot of that is also being embedded within those teams, right? Part of the backlog is not just to look at all of the new feature development or tickets that come in. Part of the mentality that we're trying to get to that is also that innovation mentality. Start looking outside in for things you could do better or different, right? It doesn't always happen, right? Because you've got production issues and the business pushing you on feature releases. So that's a discipline that I think comes with evolution. Part of it is also some of the principles that we're using in our architecture and engineering space to start looking at these more proactively. I don't think we've got a silver bullet for it yet, but that's actively on our radar.
Another question here. So you mentioned one of the KPIs as to DMZ web servers. It used to take days for these 90 minutes. Presumably business needs a lot more than a web server to see a business value, right? How do you quantify that? How do you structure that business transaction related value improvement?
Yeah, well, that's the other metric that I cited as well, where essentially, the time that now takes to deliver a new feature, whether that's a new business feature or part of the cloud platform, it's essentially we just measure the time, like that total lead time from when it comes into the backlog until when it's done and released, right? And from that perspective, it's gone from around 50 days to I think around 19 days is the current average time around that.
So business feature will come in as a story.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly. Yep.
How is Agile and cloud helping with the M&A activity? Specific benefits above it?
With the M&A activity, is that the question?
Yeah.
Do you want to take a shot at it and I can go
I'm
after?
trying to think if there's
We haven't had an acquisition,
right?
a big acquisition, let me say it that way, in the recent past. But one of the things that I see as a benefit of coming out of this is we've now got the ability to stand up sandboxes where we could potentially bring in external data, mash that up with our existing data a whole lot faster and a whole lot more securely than what we had in the past, because all of our on-prem servers would need upscaling and you'd actually have to buy additional licenses or whatever else, right? The other big thing with an M&A play is you need clean rooms to siphon off data and resources. The cloud actually allows you to do that really quickly. And we've got the capability to do that with our current foundation that we built in the cloud. So if we go in for a big acquisition in the next few years, I think we are a lot more better positioned to be able to do that from a tech perspective than I would say we were 3 years ago. No. Go ahead, Manisa.
Do you by chance have a session tomorrow at 4:45 at the MGM about how you went from a large-scale legacy migration to the cloud?
We do. And all of you guys are welcome and should come to that session, and you'd learn a lot more about our actual technical transitions. Thank you, Manise. Great question. That was the best question of the hour. All right, awesome. Thank you, guys.
Everyone.